The Canby Report was produced and recorded on the traditional territories of the Coquitlam, Mississaugas of the Credit, Anishinaabeg, Chippewa, Haudenosaunee, and Wendat peoples.
It's April 1st, 2025, and there are 4 days left until the April 5th by-elections, and 565 days left until the Vancouver general elections. This is the Canby Report. I'm Matthew Naylor.
I'm Ian Bushfield. Advance voting ends today. By the time you're listening, you won't be able to vote in advance, and you'll have to go on April 5th.
So, great. Good news service there we're providing.
It's coming up so fast, right? We plan to try to do a little bit more. I did manage to get a clips episode of statements from almost all of the candidates. The only major party candidates we didn't get were Ralph Kaiser's from ABC and Annette Riley from the Greens. Hers did come in a little bit late. She had some family things come up at the last minute. I put hers out on Patreon, and we'll slap it on the end of this episode for those who want to stick around to hear from her.
Yes, speaking of our Patreon, patreon.com/Canby Report. That is your source for citizen journalism. It is your way to support the show and keep what we do here at the Canby Report going. For everyone who has signed up and contributed over the years, thank you so much for your continued support. And if you have a couple of bucks lying around and feel like throwing them our way, it would be much appreciated. Again, patreon.com/Canby Report.
Yes, with 565 days left until the next election, we will continue to cover the twists and turns of this council, particularly as 2 new faces are set to join it in the coming weeks. That's what we want to focus on today, is this by-election, right? It's coming up so fast. So let's recap where we're at. It's not been a good month for the governing party in many ways.
No, it's been really a kind of no good, very bad campaign for ABC, where the headlines, sometimes things just don't go your way. Some of that's been drowned out by the massive amount of noise coming from the federal/international scene. You know, I care a lot about municipal politics. Case in point, this show, and maybe you caught me on the early edition a couple of weeks ago, but the noise and the kind of existential dread that is generated by international relations at this point is pretty overwhelming, and I don't blame people for possibly letting this slip by. However, it is a by-election, and everything is going to come down to turnout.
Yeah, in terms of having a bad month, anytime your political movement has multiple headlines about you apologizing for different things on different days, it's not good in terms of your momentum, but it might not matter.
No, and that's the crazy thing about these by-elections, is they are very much a black box. We don't know who's going to show up until they show up. They're not the only things that people might not know about. For example, ABC campaign signs might show up on your lawn without you knowing about them.
This was a really interesting strategy.
I mean, it's definitely interesting. Like, I'm definitely interested. I don't know if it's a good strategy.
The challenge is making sure people know they have a by-election to vote for, and people don't generally change their votes a lot. People are pretty fixed. So if someone says they want to sign in 2022 in the general election, why not just assume they want it this year? Maybe send them a little email that says, hey, if you don't want to sign, check here and we won't drop one off. Then you send your volunteers around and start putting signs up on people's yards. And it's not against the rules.
I mean, they're basically just a kind of large plastic leaflet. This is something that Stephen Carter, who has been running the ABC campaign and is both a experienced political strategist from Alberta and rival podcaster from The Strategists, figured out that this was a possible thing they can do. And honestly, there is a certain genius in it, because I don't know that a sign showing up on my lawn from the party that I had previously agreed to have a sign on my lawn for would do anything that great to annoy me, especially if I had technically been asked if I didn't want it.
It did come up a little awkward and uncomfortable as former park board commissioner Scott Jansen, I believe, his mother-in-law got one of these signs on her lawn, and given his expulsion from the party, found that in poor taste.
Certainly there are always going to be those edge cases. The more I talk about this, though, the more I'm thinking, especially for a by-election, this was kind of brilliant. And, you know, I don't know if it's going to work, because black box and everything, but I am impressed.
As Carter told the Globe and Mail, his political party rivals are just jealous. Quote, read the rules, think creatively. Ken Sim, when asked about this as well, said, oops, it happened. I totally apologize for that. You know, people think you have perfect systems, and obviously we don't.
Okay, this makes me hate Ken Sim even more. Like, I think Stephen Carter is brilliant in this particular regard, and I think Ken Sim is a fucking weasel, because it's not an oops, it happened. This was a deliberate choice that you made. You could easily give a non-apology apology. Oh, I'm sorry if people were offended that we provided signs again to them after asking if they wanted them. But saying oops is so thoroughly disingenuous that I recoil.
Speaking of things that happened, Ralph Kaiser's ABC candidate had to apologize for emailing all his union staff and members and associates at the police department, notifying them that he's running with ABC, something that Elections BC does not technically violate any of their rules, but I'm pretty sure violates the Personal Information Protection Act.
Yeah, okay, so using private email lists, it can be construed as in-kind campaign contributions, and this was always something when I was on, like, the student council at UBC or had access to long lists of names of whatever that we had to be aware of. The union is not intrinsically non-partisan organization by any stretch of the imagination, but
They're not endorsing ABC. They don't have to.
is that because the merger is well underway? I don't know. It's a little skeezy.
Yeah. It reminds me of the one thing we haven't talked about with Kaiser's.
From a little skeezy to the downright revolting.
Jen St. Dennis brings this up in her piece profiling Kaiser's for the Tyee. She brings up a lot of different things, some of which we've talked about in the past, his comments on social media and stuff like that. But he came up, actually, his name came up in the Miles Gray inquest. Miles Gray was a man who was murdered by Vancouver police officers in a South Burnaby backyard. The police believe he was having a psychotic break and had gone feral.
Maybe that's what has been said.
Yeah.
We really don't know. The only thing that we are very confident in is that about 8 police officers beat him to death.
Part of the challenge is officers did not take notes after the incident, contrary to existing policy, and a couple of the officers who were later questioned by the OPCC told them they were directed not to take notes by Vancouver Police Union representatives. One of those officers, Josh Wong, said he thinks it was Ralph Kaiser's who said he should not write any notes. Kaiser's said he didn't directly tell anyone not to write notes.
The wording of his denial was, he basically says, I wasn't there and I didn't instruct anyone to not take notes at the time. That doesn't actually rule out what the constable is saying, which is that, you know, you provided instructions several months afterwards. You also headed the union, which ostensibly provided these instructions to not take notes at the time. I feel like Ralph Kaiser's fingerprints are all over this kind of thing.
And you know who didn't know that story was his running mate, Jamie Stein, who was asked about this at an event like, hey, how do you feel about running with Ralph Kaiser's? And Jamie got recorded on this in a very uncomfortable moment where he says, a lot of people keep asking me online why I'm running with this guy.
Yeah, so in particular at an event at UBC, someone was recording Mr. Stein after all these things that were new to Mr. Stein were revealed to him about Ralph Kaiser. He said, quote, "I look at my wife who's here with my 3 kids like, did I just make the biggest mistake of my life?" And, I don't know. I don't know, Jamie. Sure.
He does go on to say that after door knocking and campaigning with Kaisers, he's come around that he's a great guy, and I'm so proud to be out on the campaign trail with him. I love the unpolished moments you get in a municipal election, because there's not as many of these at the federal level where people are handled all the time and they can't just speak off the cuff about what they actually think.
No, people are definitely bringing their D game to municipal politics. ABC has not been facing criticism only on the Ralph Kaiser's front. There have been some abhorrent things in the draft plan about the Downtown East Side. Ken Sim has also apologized for the mention in the draft plan of sending Indigenous people back to their nations, basically buying them bus tickets and telling them to get the fuck out. He was saying this is worth apologizing for, I guess.
Let's talk Bitcoin.
So, Bitcoin, the blockchain-based currency, is something that apparently ABC and Ken Sim, and I kind of feel like this has to be coming from Ken Sim just because it's so much his vibe. One said he posted a clip from a podcast in which Sim is heard arguing that Bitcoin can stop wars because countries fight over gold, which is news to me.
Literally the only thing that has been fought over.
It's the only one.
That is why Russia invaded Ukraine. That is why Israel is in Gaza right now. It's all gold.
It's for sure. It's definitely gold and not like it's such an asinine statement that has no grounding in reality that it makes me want to tear my fucking hair out. The fact that it's a physical commodity is the fact, but people fight over ideology all the time. People fight over what they believe in just because they believe in it. Bitcoin is not a fiat currency, it's a kind of group confidence trick currency. The only value of gold throughout history is that it doesn't corrode and is otherwise basically useless.
Other people want it.
People do want it. It's not something essential to us. To quote John Green, without gold, we only have to face the universe's depraved indifference to us without the benefit of metallic adornment. There are increasing uses for gold because it is a good conductor and it's useful in creating circuit boards and blah, 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 blah. But for most of history, you can't do anything with gold. You can make jewelry because it's so soft and easy to work and it has a very low melting point and it's very ductile. But that, of course, is overlooking the fact that it has been the only thing people have ever fought over.
Yeah, the clip is wild. I saw someone point out when they went through Ken Sim's calendars for the last 18 months, he's taken like 10 meetings with Bitcoin people, including this podcast, which I'm pretty sure if you watch the clip, he is at City Hall talking to them. I'm just basing this on the wood-paneled adornment behind him. That gives me that vibe. Maybe that's his house, maybe that's an office, but I'm pretty sure it's a City Hall office. It feels like a Joe Rogan smoking pot conversation rather than a serious city mayor talking about real issues.
Yeah, well, and that's because he isn't. But I don't even know if Vancouver's a serious city at this point. What are we doing? Let's take a look at ourselves, folks. I know Kennedy Stewart was not fully with it for much of his mayoralty, but at least he behaved like a mayor.
Oh, speaking of behaving like a mayor, we talked on the last episode about the Integrity Commissioner's finding against the Parks Board, where ABC was caucusing against the spirit and letter of the Local Government Act. This has prompted BC Ombudsperson Jay Chalk to write to the Minister of Municipal Affairs, Ravi Kahlon, to express concerns around not just ABC, but broader issues in municipalities across the province where stuff is happening behind closed doors that should be at the board or the council table. What he writes, especially because ABC's party president, Stephen Molnar, said, yeah, we're just going to keep caucusing because there's nothing the integrity commissioner can do, and we want to run an effective city. Chalk writes to the minister, what I find troubling is all of this really undermines the integrity of the oversight system. When findings from an independent body can be publicly dismissed without any consequence, it exposes how fragile the current structure is. And this isn't about one party, it's not even about one municipality, it's about building a province-wide system strong enough to withstand various challenges to municipal integrity. He is calling for independent integrity commissioners that Surrey can't do away with, Vancouver can't threaten to neuter, give them some actual teeth, which is something we've noted is a problem for a while.
Yeah, I am somewhat sympathetic to the argument that caucusing is, and the backroom dealings is part of running an effective city. I think taking official notice of this caution would have been appropriate. Discussions should happen in the open, but to an extent, there's always a certain degree to which that's a farce, because getting stuff on the agenda, like, at some point, someone has to discuss this elsewhere. Like, not everything happens in the open, and there's a certain amount of private discussion. I think that one of the major talents of a successful civic politician is the ability to walk the line between working with your colleagues and working in backrooms and either advocating or bloviating at the council table, whatever the case may be.
Yeah, I think Molnar, in his comments here to Vancouver Sun, does underline the tension that exists. He points out, we agree with the ombudsperson that the provincial government needs to do something, just not the actions he recommends. Molnar points out the province has created, enabled, and fostered a party system. It's a historic fact. Parties have the right to caucus under the Charter of Rights and Freedoms. I don't know the case law on that, but I could see the argument. I'll concede.
It is not prima facie completely ridiculous. The lawyers who did Surrey submissions for the police force didn't write this one.
And then he points out, on the other hand, there's these judicial opinions, interpretations by those with no legal authority. Presumably he's implicating the integrity commissioner here, have suggested the very act of caucusing is against the Municipal Act. Which is it? Which set of laws should we follow? He's trying to pit the Charter against the Municipal Act, but if that's the case, then, I don't know, judicial review the integrity commissioner's ruling?
I'm actually not even sure if it would technically be eligible for judicial review because it doesn't have true force and effect.
It doesn't do anything.
Because it doesn't.
I don't like what she said. But it is this tension, right, between how should parties operate versus how municipalities historically operated. And it's also this tension we have where municipal government has to be the executive, the legislature, and often the judiciary as well for public hearings and zoning.
Oh, for sure. There's
stuff.
definitely a quasi-judicial function of municipal government.
I don't know what the best way forward is, but it's clear our municipalities are stuck in a antiquated system that is creating these tensions and contradictions.
Yeah, I think there is a degree to which the municipalities are in need of reform. I think representation is definitely something that should be looked at. Living in Toronto, I see a council that has basically the opposite problems to Vancouver in its party system and at-large elections. Like, independents and ward-based elections create problems as well, which is why my opinion is now that they should be mixed.
It'll be very interesting to see how Alberta develops as they've introduced parties into the mix in Calgary and Edmonton, often over local objections. There is now a better city Calgary that exists.
Great. A better Calgary.
That would have been an obvious one.
Yeah.
Finally, for the ABC roundup, no other parties got big headlines. That's why I'm focusing so much on them. It's a by-election and they're the governing party, so no one else gets headlines.
They're such a slow-moving target. Jeez. Like, we could have said one and then gone over, like, platforms or the absolutely ridiculous things that came out on City Hall. It is very, very weird that we've been able to fill 24 minutes and 43 seconds effectively with unbroken series of ABC fuck-up scaffs and nonsense.
Maybe it's permeating through. The Junos were on Sunday night, and Ken Sim, as the local mayor, had to pass the metaphorical torch to the next host city, Hamilton. He got boos from the crowd. Hamilton's mayor got applause.
Well,
That's just me being petty.
well, and fair enough, because there's no one more popular in Vancouver than the mayor of Hamilton.
But on the election as a whole, each of the parties has platforms and things they've promised and talked about, and they're kind of exactly where you'd all think. We'll link to their documents in the show notes. The most interesting one, and you hear it in these statements we put out, is Team is really trying to position themselves with the anti-development lefty will represent workers, renters, and the neighborhood vibe. Mm-hmm. They're the ones who really are saying they want to stand up for tenants.
Well, and this is the thing with Team, is that they're fundamentally a reactionary party. Like, they're kind of for freezing Vancouver in aspic and trying to preserve it exactly as it is, which is such a fundamentally wrong-headed idea that I don't know how to engage with it very well. Yeah, you might believe that people should be renters and stand up for the renters here, but none of that is going to change the fact that market forces are buffeting our fair city and are going to change affordability and how people are able to afford to live in it. It just feels like they're not reaching for the whole problem.
It's really seductive, the language around community voice and neighborhood engagement, but it does inevitably lead to that quagmire, that stuck nature. They've really taken aim at the Broadway plan and tried to make this a referendum around the Broadway plan, and I don't know, like, it's so hard to gauge the vibes, especially since neither of us are working on campaigns in Vancouver. I've heard reports that there are team signs around Kitsilano and where you would expect, but there's also ABC Cope signs. There's a lot of mixed colors that people might not expect, like team in one city. There's an occasional mix of those signs because people contain multitudes and don't always have clear politics in their head.
Nope, they don't. But I think what's important is that people find, every one of you, I am speaking directly to the listeners, make sure you vote. Make sure you vote, bring someone else. Turnout matters so much in these elections. There is no excuse for not voting. I'm sorry we didn't come out with an episode in time to remind you to go to the advanced polls. So now you have to do it on the 5th. So do it on the 5th.
The good news is it sounds like the advanced polls have been busy. There was a couple stories showing lineups for the advanced polls and record numbers. So I'm very encouraged by that. We could do a lot better than 11%. As long as Vancouver does better than the 1% that turned up in Coquitlam's school board by-election.
Oof.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's rough. Well, we end every episode of the Canby Report with a little tidbit from Vancouver's history, and seeing as how it is April Fool's Day, we thought our Vancouverata this week would be retelling one of the great Vancouver Canucks April Fool's pranks of all time.
So, Pavel Bure was a long time, very prominent hockey player. He was a draft pick for the Vancouver Canucks and was fantastic. He was a renowned player, served with the team for 8 years, 91 to 99. People loved him. He had to leave, go to Florida, go to New York. Retired in about 2005 or 2006 after chronic knee injuries. There was sadness for that. People liked him. In 2009, he appeared, kind of surprisingly, on a radio station, Team 1040, with Barry McDonald and Scott Rintoul, where they start talking about his planned comeback to the Vancouver Canucks. He just turned 38, and they said, things are in conversations. Nothing's confirmed, but I'm doing better.
Yeah, this wasn't completely out of left field, but it wasn't as unthinkable as you might imagine, because Matt Sundin was in his midst of his one comeback season in Vancouver at the time, same ages as Bure, and yeah, people bought it. People were absolutely convinced by the totally deadpan delivery by the hosts McDonald and Rintoul. And
Over a 6-minute segment. It's live on the Daily Hive. We'll put the link in the show notes. But yeah, you can go and listen to this notable April 1st delivery.
yeah. So, obviously, stay savvy, people. Check your media literacy. And most importantly, get out and vote. For Leg and Boot Media, I'm Matthew Naylor.
I'm Ian Bushfield.
Good night.
Hi, my name's Annette Riley. I'm running with the Green Party of Vancouver in the upcoming Vancouver City Council by-election, April 5th. Come on out. My name's right at the bottom of the ballot, so start down at the bottom, work your way back up. I live in East Van, and I've been here for, I think, just over a decade, and in the Greater Vancouver area before that since the mid-90s. And I have to say, East Van is my home. It's where I have always felt the most able to be my most authentic self. This is where I belong, and I never want to move out of this city. And as a renter in East Van, it's scary. You never know when you're going to get that call or that notice that family member wants to move in, or the building is being demolished and something else is being built there instead. So I get that. I did used to own a home before I had cancer. Yeah, that's right. I'm a cancer survivor of an environmentally caused cancer. So that was a large part of what attracted me to the Green Party. And I did lose my sister 2 years ago to an environmentally caused cancer as well. And I have to say, she was just getting started in a political career when she passed. And she had this wonderful way to bridge divides and find common ground with people of differing ideologies and beliefs. And if I could do anything in this world to be a positive change, especially in the political world, it's using that as an example to bring people together so that we can create real change. I am strong and I am tenacious and persistent. I have discovered these things through my life, and I do not back down from challenges. I never have. I lead my film sets because I'm a filmmaker, and I've been first assistant directing for about 5 years. And I lead my film sets with kindness and respect, but please do not mistake that for meekness. So I am ready to step in to this role, and I'm ready to stand up against Mayor Ken Sim and ABC and hold them accountable for some of the actions that they've taken that have been damaging to the city and to the people of Vancouver. Frankly, a lot has been happening behind closed doors, and it's time that comes out into the light. Pete Fry has been doing his darndest to make sure that the people of Vancouver know what's happening, but he can't do that alone. He keeps saying, I need you in council. We already have a working relationship, and I know that I can just hit the ground running as soon as the new councillors land in the chambers. So it's time that we get in there, and Pete and I can get together, can push for policies that will be beneficial to Vancouver and to the people of Vancouver, not just the powerful people of Vancouver. On top of that, of course, I mean, I was mentioning housing. That is a massive one. It's such a big issue to tackle. We need so much housing here, and the province has mandated that we have to have certain density, especially in our transit-oriented areas. And so affordable housing, really, it's at the top of my list. Housing for everyone. We need stronger rent protections. We need to renew leases for co-ops and the nonprofits. And we need to be using city-owned land above anything else. We need to be using it to build below market and supportive housing and social housing. The pause on supportive housing is the worst thing that could have happened. It made zero sense unless you've got another plan coming in. You know, that's the only reason that would make any sense. We should be bringing the renter's office back. Pete Fry had championed that the previous term, and then ABC got rid of it. But renters need these supports, and I'm here to make sure that they get it. On top of that, healthy communities mean so much to me, given my life history, my health history. So we need to ensure that everybody has access to green spaces and to parks and to community centers. I've discovered what's called the 3-30-300 rule. And it's just a healthier, greener way to a system, proven system, for cities to be healthier and greener. And what it is 3 mature trees would be visible from every home. We've got 30% tree canopy coverage in every neighborhood. And every home would be within 300 meters from the nearest quality park or green space. So this just promotes livability and healthy communities and a connected community. So that's something else that I would really love to bring forward. So please, like I said, April 5th, go to the bottom of your ballot, check my name, and then work your way up. I'll leave you with this one last tidbit. This, my favorite part of Vancouver trivia, I suppose. Being originally from Alberta and coming from a long line of farmers that homesteaded in 1892 in central Alberta, I was reading this book by Barry Broadfoot called The 10 Lost Years, which interviewed a whole bunch of people across Canada during the Great Depression. And there is this area in Canada and the US called the Palliser Triangle, that where the drought hit extra hard and the land had been overfarmed and it had become dried up and desolate, basically like a dust bowl essentially, and people were having to abandon their farms. There's photos of cars being just cut off on the top, and then people piling as much stuff and strapping in as much of their belongings as they could, and then they fled to cities. So Vancouver received a massive boom from the prairies back at that time. People were camping out in South Vancouver, and it's just, to me, now that I live here and reading these things, going, okay, so Vancouver's always been a place that accepted people from other areas. We are a migrant city. We are an immigrant city. And I think that's something to celebrate, something to be proud of, is the diversity that this city holds and how welcoming this city always has been. So anyway, that's my fun little bit of trivia. Thank you so much for having me. And please come out and vote April 5th.